Hi, and welcome back to Amy's Cooking. Today we'll be making one of my favorite all-time recipe, pho ball, or also known as Vietnamese beef noodle soup. It is a broth base served with rice noodles and included are different types of meats, different types of veggies, and you can serve it with minced cilantro, onions, pepper, and lime. So let's get started. This dish is all about the broth, and the broth takes between 10 to 12 hours to cook. For the broth, you want to use knucklebones and femur bones. These two types of bones will give you the most flavorful broth and also a very clear color. You want to clean the bones with salt and water, and if you can soak it for about 10 minutes before you clean it, that's even better. Clean it really, really well before you parboil it for about 5 to 10 minutes. If there are any types of other meats that you want to include, which could be flanks, tendons, tripes, you will also want to do the same thing. Today I'm using brisket, so I'm also going to clean my brisket also with salt water. Yes, it does take a little bit time to make the broth. I know I mentioned between 10 to 12 hours. Some people can do this in 6 hours, even shorter. It's just that the longer you're able to cook the bones and the meat, the better your broth is going to be. And for the best bowl of pho, it really does depend on the broth. And therefore, I will show you how I do it. That will not take you all day. So here we are parboiling the bones and also the brisket. Cook it on high heat for about 10 to 15 minutes. At this point, go ahead and remove it from the heat. You want to use warm water and we're going to rinse the bones. Once they're rinsed, you're going to transfer the bones and the meat to a clean pot. For my recipe, I'm using 10 liters of water. So, like I said earlier, what I do is I start the night before. Once you've transferred the bones and the brisket to the larger pot, you want to turn the heat up to about medium, but you don't want the water to boil. If the water boils, the soup is going to be cloudy. You cook it for about 2 hours, then you remove the brisket. As you can see here, our broth is super clear, and this is 2 hours after. So after 2 hours, you want to turn the heat all the way down to low, absolutely the lowest setting. Then you're going to cover the lid and let it cook all through the night. The next morning, you're going to run this broth through the strainer and add back hot water to equal the 10 liter that we started. For the seasoning for the broth, we're going to use different types of herbs. And I have all of these different herbs listed in the recipe for you. So the herbs are meant to give this broth a very unique, amazing smell and aroma. Take all of the different types of herbs, add it to a cooking pan on low heat. We want to roast the different types of herbs to activate the aroma. When you roast it, just make sure you continuously stir it so none of it really gets burnt. Once you start to smell the aroma, just continue for a couple more minutes. You'll hear these popping sounds and you can really tell. Again, don't let it burn, but as long as you see things are starting to brown a little and you really can truly smell the aroma, at that point, go ahead and remove it from the heat. Can you hear that popping sound? That's what we're looking for. Now, once it's removed from the heat, let it cool for a few minutes and then add it to a cheesecloth bag. Tie it up, and we will be putting this directly into the broth. But before we do that, two of the other ingredients that we'll need to also roast are the onions and also the ginger. Again, we do this so that we can activate the smell, and that really could help contribute to a lot of the aroma. So on high heat, a small little grill, just put your onions that you've cut into two, and also the ginger that you've cut into two. And as you can see here, it is kind of brown, which is really perfect. That's what you're looking for. That's the consistency that we need. And once that's done, take everything and add it to the broth. Keep in mind that the herbs that we added to the bag earlier that we roasted, once we add it to the broth and we cook it, it's going to change the color of your broth. So once you are able to smell the aroma in your broth, about an hour and a half, then you can remove that bag. If you like for the aroma to be a little bit stronger, leave it in there as long as you like. So just a quick recap. We've cooked the broth all through the night. In the morning, we removed all of the bones. We ran it to the strainer, and we have added the different types of herbs and ginger and onion. From this point, you want to leave it on low heat for about an hour to 2 hours, because you do want all of that to come out into the broth. You can also at this point add all of your seasoning. The amount that I'm given specifically in this recipe for all of the different types of seasoning is based on 10 liters of broth. So make sure that when you remove the bone from the broth, that you add back the hot water to equal exactly 10 liters of water. Now, I cook for a large family. That's why this recipe is a lot more than a typical family would eat. So please scale it down if you need something smaller, and just do the math and just use whatever the amount that you need. Time to prepare our different types of veggies. We have green onions that we will chop up finely that we can put onto the soup. If you like it a little bit more spicy, I have added jalapenos, and of course white onions that we will also cut into small little strips that we add to the soup as well. In addition to all that, cilantro is really key to this pho. The cilantro just gives it a lot more flavor. Bean sprouts adds a very refreshing taste. Can't have a bowl of pho without bean sprouts. It's just definitely a must. These basils are actually from my very own garden. They look so beautiful. I've just cut them fresh, and look, it still has the flowers on them. Clean it really well. I'm just trimming off the flowers. Okay, so the next part, what we're doing is cutting up all of the different veggies that we just washed. And jalapenos are really just added on as you like. It's not a must. Like I said, if you like spicy, you can add a couple pieces. And here are the white onions. See how thinly cut they are? Because you're adding it onto the broth once you pour it into the bowl. So you want it to be thin enough that you can cook it with the hot broth. And of course our green onions or our scallions. And just chop it off really fine. I like to use the leaf part just because it cooks well. And then for the bulb, what you want to do is just run a knife through and make these little cute flower. And you can also add that to your bowl of pho for a very pretty presentation. Same thing with the cilantro. We're just going to cut it into small little pieces as well. And all of these are just used to garnish your bowl right before you pour the broth over. Lemon, or actually lime, is something that really just depends on the individual. Some people like to squeeze a small amount, others don't prefer it. So I have it as an option. These pepper are also from our garden. They are so spicy. I just have a few. Again, you can add it based on how spicy you like your pho to be. And this is the complete dish. Look how refreshing everything looks. There's the basil, the bean sprouts, and the onions, the bottom part, the bulb part of the scallion. So this is the brisket. Remember, the brisket was what I cooked in the beginning with the bones the night before, and I left it cooked for 2 hours, and I removed it before I let the bones continue to cook through the night. So the brisket, when you take it out of the refrigerator the next morning, just put it back into the broth about 30 minutes before you're about to serve. That way it can get a little bit, it won't be so dry, and it will soak in a lot of that flavor as well. I also have meatballs and tenderloins that I cut into small little pieces. And I'll show you how we present these on the bowl. I'm using fresh rice noodle, but you can also use the dry ones. If they're the dry ones, then you have to boil them a little bit longer. If it's the fresh one like these, I soak it in water for about 10 minutes, and then I just swirl it around in boiling water for maybe 2-3 minutes, and that should be sufficient to cook the noodles. Take that and put it onto the bowl, and you're going to line over the noodle with your different types of meat. Here's the brisket and the meatballs, and also the tenderloins that we cut up. And for the fresh meat, the raw one, you can practically use any kind of beef type that you like. Just make sure that you cut it thin enough that when you pour the hot broth over it, that it can cook that meat. And the broth has to be boiling hot. As you can see, it's cooking the meat right now as you're pouring over it. And also on top of that, you've got the peppers, the cilantros, the scallions, and also the white onions as well. It looks so beautiful. And so a lot of times people dip the meat with the sriracha and the hoisin sauce, or some people just put it straight into their pho broth. I have a tendency to just kind of dip because I don't want to mess with the broth. I like the aroma and the flavor that I'm actually smelling in the actual pho. So I kind of dip everything rather than putting it into the pho. Look how amazing this looks. It looks so delicious. All different types of herbs, different types of meat, broth that has been cooked for 12 hours, all the aroma, the flavor. This is just one of those dishes that you must try. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you liked this video. And if you do, please give me a thumbs up, comment, and hit the subscribe button.